Dion, what is that in your background? I see a lot of like soft toys. Is it like your entire collection? Arrow also has.
Yeah, I have some smaller ones at the
So
side.
cute.
I think this is my
Oh my
collection over the
god.
years. I think the only reason why I keep all of this is because each one like reminds me of a certain memory that I have. If you can see like the Winnie the Pooh, the first row of Winnie the Pooh, those are from McDonald's in Singapore. Yeah,
Oh.
I remember queuing up with my parents for them.
All right, everybody, and welcome back to the group chat. We're excited to have you today, and we're going to be continuing with Teacher Dion. Maybe Teacher Dion, you can introduce yourself a little bit to our viewers.
Hi, okay, my name is Teacher Dion. I am teaching upper secondary as well as H2 math at OVERMUGGED. Yep.
So the first question of the day is, how big is the jump from Sec 4 E-Math or A-Math to H2 Math?
I think the jump is as big as you can imagine it to be. I think maybe the last time you had such a big jump was probably between secondary two as well as sec three. I think you taking on so many more subjects as well as math suddenly becoming so much more difficult and having so many more topics. I think you can imagine the jump to be very similar to that. However, those who only took E-math for their O levels, I could only suggest that the jump is going to be so much bigger than that. Yeah, because a lot of the content that you'll be studying in H2 math actually comes from A math. So for the O level students that did not take A math, actually it'll be good for you to like read up a little bit just to preempt yourself on like what are some of the things that you could be encountering in JC. Because I think in terms of difficulty as well as in terms of the amount of content that you'll be studying just for math alone, it's going to be so much more than from sec 2 to sec 3. Yeah.
Actually, just to jump in here, Dion, wanted to ask also, for H2 Math students, how much of, whatever they are doing is actually
Hmm.
coming from, the O-level syllabus, especially for those who are revising right now for their A-levels.
Hmm. I think if I were to just give a rough gauge, you could probably see about 30 to 40% being topics that you are quite familiar with. For example, in E-math, you do touch a little bit on vectors. For A-math, you touch quite a little bit on differentiation and integration. Inequalities and equations are stuff that you're familiar with. Functions are stuff that you have roughly understood the concept of, especially in physics or in chemistry. So I would say that roughly the topics are not around half the topics you will have already encountered before, but in terms of content, they are going to go a lot more in depth, and they're going to cover a lot more ground than what the sec 3 and sec 4 syllabus covers. So not something that you're very unfamiliar with, but it will be definitely become a lot harder lah per topic. Mm.
I mean, just to jump in here, because I don't teach H2 math necessarily, but I mean, I've been a student and I took H2 math. In terms of the impression that I got as I moved from, I was actually doing very well in secondary math, both A math, E math. But when I went on to JC, it really felt completely different because that's when the ideas and the concept got a lot more abstract, right? Things like complex numbers starts to appear, like current series. So a lot of this were very foreign to me. And in the past, I found myself to be good at math because it's very logical based. I will still say there's still an element of that, but because of the nature of how much more complex the idea is, it's not something that you can sit down and figure it out on the spot. You actually have to study beforehand. There's a lot of concepts that are a lot more challenging. There's also one part on the data part whereby there's hypo testing and stuff like that, which I find to be interesting because there's a super big relevance to actual real life. And to the best of my understanding, when I speak with my peers in computer science, they actually say that math has a pretty big part to play in computing,
Mm.
which is why it is quite important for you to make sure that, hey, let's say if even now in secondary school, I'm dead set that, oh, I want to go to com science because that's where the future AI, all of it is at. You really need to start considering, hey, if I work backwards, right, I want to do com science, working one step back, I probably need to take H2 math. Working one step back, it probably makes sense for me to take A math.
Mm.
I would say that decision to go to com science can start as early as your sec 2 streaming as you choose for your upper sec subjects. But I think Dion will be able to tell us more later on during the podcast itself. So that's just something to look out for. Because a lot of times we think that, I just need to decide my subject combination in the next step. But actually, you have to think a few steps ahead. I almost certainly don't recommend taking H2 math unless you have taken A math in secondary school. But that's my personal take. Because there's just so much content in A math that you need in H2 math. And if you didn't do that, you're going to suffer a lot. Yeah.
Interesting. Actually, personally for me, I took H1 math and I heard a lot of horror stories of H2 math students. When I came out from my own H1 math paper, there were people who came out from their H2 math paper and they were like sobbing. So I was like, what is going on? So that leads me to, the very next question. What are some really hard, H2 math topics and how do you prepare for them, especially from a H2 math teacher's point of view? Like Dion is an expert. At this point in time, it would not have caused him to cry if he did all those topics. So maybe Dion, you can crack it for us.
I think the hardest H2 math topics are those topics that you are firstly unfamiliar with because you have not seen them in O levels, as well as those that require you to have that level of depth immediately. So the hardest topics that most students feedback are definitely vectors and complex numbers because they are firstly the biggest topics, and secondly they are the ones that are perhaps the hardest to, what Daryl said, see or visualize. So for example, in vectors, if when we learn things like what is a dot product, what is a cross product, why is taking two vectors and crossing one another giving you the normal things, these are things that for the first time in math, it's very difficult for a teacher to explain to you why is a dot b taking the coordinates and multiply one another, like why does it follow that procedure. But for us to be able to explain that in depth to you, it requires like a lot of like more complex like university knowledge. So a lot of knowledge that's being presented to you is like okay, we just need to accept it for now, right? uh Topics that have that kind of concepts are usually more difficult for students to grasp because it's a lot more like memorizing and just like accepting the fact. And there are also topics that, like for example in complex numbers, when we talk about changing it into an exponential form, like why can a number be represented in the form of e. Like how am I going to explain to you that a number can be e to the power of an imaginary number? Like why is it that way? A lot of it is just like, okay, it can be done like that, just follow. Yeah. So topics that have that kind of concepts will need a bit more, will be a bit harder lah.
In that sense, like, just to jump in here, like, so if all those topics are hard and there are so many topics, right, which one should I like tackle first? What resources should I use? Is doing the TYS helpful or should I do like a topical assessment book kind of thing? What do you think?
I think for if we are able to identify which topics are the hard ones when the teacher is teaching, I would suggest really building up your foundation on understanding the topic before we actually dive into the questions. I think a lot of students that study H2 math like to tackle it the same way that they tackle O level math, which is I try to identify the common question types and I try to memorize like how we answer those question types in the O level exam. But like what Daryl mentioned, A level has a lot of analysis, A level has a lot of application, and if we are not able to understand the foundations of it, actually there are a lot of questions that you will not be able to answer because you don't have that foundational background. And H2 math comes in a way where they can come in a lot of context questions where they don't ask you explicitly what they're looking for, and they require you to like actually apply your knowledge into a certain context. So for example, in maybe in differential equations, they can talk about it in like rate of decay, or they can talk about it like maybe like a spreading of a virus, and give you a story, and they don't ask you explicitly like, okay, this is going to be a differential equation question. So you need that kind of background to be able to apply to the question before you can actually even start to solve it. Yeah.
To give you a bit more context, if you have never understood why it's called JC, right? JC is called junior college. It's meant to prepare you for college, which is university. So going back to a point that Dion has mentioned, the function of math in many contexts in junior college is to prepare you so that when you move on to take any science related or engineering related courses with very real life application, you can actually apply a lot of these math concepts to help you up in your specific field that you're going to specialize and you have your career in. So I mean, adding on to what Dion has to say, if you actually take some time to go and look at the syllabus, they actually do tell you exactly which kind of scenarios are related to which math concepts. I'm just going to do a rapid fire. So the one that Dion has just mentioned is how differential equations affect things like your population growth, your radioactive decay, and even viral spread, right? So if you think back one step, oh, during the COVID days, how did the government decide, oh, when is it time to lock down or not? What they look at is the infection numbers, about how many COVID cases and how fast that is growing, and to use differential equation to calculate backwards when is the time for us to put a hard stop so that we can bring down the infection rate. So there's math involved in all of this. It's not just randomly, our prime minister feeling it, okay, today we lock down. No, it's actually based on logic, it's based on math. So other things that you might find quite interesting for students that are looking to go into business or finance, it's actually very important for you to know how does sequencing and series work, how probability works, and even sampling distribution. These are all very relevant. Now, if you're planning to go into more clinical research, right, you want to go into science, more bio-related stuff, probability is important, hypo-testing is important in terms of determining things like correlation and regression. So it's really very interesting because no matter what aspect you go into, right, math is relevant. Like there's no running away from math, it's just to what extent. So for things like kinematics and dynamics, if you want to go into aerospace engineering, anything that does mechanical engineering, you will need to know your functions, your calculus, and your vectors, right? How do you know what's the projectile of the plane or the missile flying if you cannot calculate your vectors in three-dimensional plane? So you see, the thing here is that there's no running away from math. I think, Gabriel, you can even agree with me, right? Even in media-related courses, there is an element of data when you look at data analytics. So you still need to know your math no matter what. So for those of you who are very fearful of H2 math, or you feel like, wow, I just hate this subject, I think take a moment to embrace how important it is, especially in your further career, rather than running away from it. So the question now is more about how do I get better at it rather than like I just don't like it. Yeah. So that's why H2 math is going to be very important. And that's why it is a prerequisite for many of your university courses if you actually took time to go and do the research.
Thanks for that, Daryl. Yeah, and super true. Yes, I still end up doing quite a bit of math where I work at. Anyways, just to hop in here as well, actually, Daryl is referencing the SEAB syllabus. It's not something that you guys don't have. So actually, if you take a look at the SEAB syllabus, it tells you the different topics and the different corresponding contexts in which they can give you certain questions. So if you want to prepare yourself, you want to know what could possibly come out, as what Dion said, right? They give you like a whole storyline with your math questions. You could take a look at the SEAB syllabus. And what we're going to do for you also is to really label and break down the topics so that as you prepare for your A levels, you'll be able to have a checklist to check against to make sure that you have revised all the necessary topics before your exams. Okay, with that, we will head for the commercial break and we'll see you soon in the second half.
Hi everyone, if this is your first time tuning into our podcast, welcome. OVERMUGGED is one of Singapore's fastest growing secondary and JC tuition brand. We're located all across Singapore, including locations like Kovan, Bukit Timah, and Marine Parade. If you're curious about the learning experience here at OVERMUGGED, sign up for a free trial lesson anytime. And with that, back to the podcast.
Okay, and we are back for the very second half. So this question is very important because a lot of you are studying for your A-level exams, and this question is something that you guys have asked. So Teacher Dion, how is it possible to really make sure that every time I do an exam paper, I will confirm score an A during my H2 math exams?
I am so sorry, but I don't know how to guarantee that you get A, right? I think it's really dependent on like your current strengths and like where you are currently. But let's say, for example, if you were to set the aim as A levels to get A for A levels, I think I have a few tips that I can recommend for you. Firstly, we need to be able to know what our strengths and weaknesses are in terms of our topics, right? So what I would recommend for you right now is to be able to focus on the areas that you are weak in right now. I know it seems very commonsensical, but focus on the areas that you're weak in first. I think when it comes to October, the early October or mid October, I think it's time to change the focus into trying to focus on the areas that you're strong in rather than those that you're weak in. So try to tackle those questions where you already know that you're strong in those topics, and try to be able to do them fast and to be able to do them accurately. One tip that I always tell my students is to always use their calculator. Try not to rely on mental sums, because sometimes during the exam we tend to be a bit careless, and try to use the calculator to check your answers more often than you know. So the calculator has a lot of features that you should be familiar with. You can actually check whether your differentiation and integration is correct using your calculator, or like some of your vectors, even cross product for vectors. There's actually a way to use the calculator to check your answer. Yeah, so knowing all these tips and tricks and being able to type them quickly into the exam, like, I think it will really save you a lot of marks and a lot of time.
Maybe I can hop in here. So just to give everybody a reality check. Because for me, right, I want to come from more of a perspective of if you're still in secondary school and you're tuning in, you're listening to H2 Math, what to expect. So the paper for H2 Math, right, paper 1 and paper 2 is 3 hours and 3 hours. So that is a very long paper. And that is very tiring if you think about 3 hours sitting down solving math questions. So one thing that I strongly encourage secondary school or current JC students to prepare for is what I call the mental stamina, which is the ability to sit down and concentrate for 3 hours non-stop, and to make sure you don't get fatigued by it, and or to lose concentration as a result or in the process. So it's very important for you to actually put yourself in the environment. So instead of saying, you go to Starbucks and you study, and then you're just there, right? And then you're studying, or 1 hour later, I go and grab a drink, or I go and start using my phone, or I chat with my friend. You keep breaking up your study sessions into very small parts. What that takes away from you is the chance for you to actually sit down and put yourself through that very rigorous regime, right, of having to concentrate non-stop for 3 hours. And trust me, that is not something that comes naturally. It's something that you have to build. And the more you build this stamina, when you actually go for your H2 math exam, you'll find yourself that actually I'm not that tired. I'm not that burnt up by the second hour mark or by 2 hour 30 minutes. You still have some of that concentration left for you to pull through to make sure you don't make any mistakes along the way. So in that sense, I think it's very important for you to go for more time practices, even though 3 hours is a very long time. But that's exactly why you will need that revision session for yourself. So I'll say that is one big tip for myself that I found when I took H2 math that I struggled with initially, and that's how I came about to do a bit better on it. The next is you also need to understand that in the context of the whole paper, every question is very long, right? So what Dion mentioned earlier, which is it's very important to tackle those questions that you can score a lot of marks in early on at the start of the paper. There will be a couple of questions that you're a bit more hesitant or is a weaker topic. Leave those to the last to tackle. Why? Because the likelihood of you scoring very well for those topics is not as high, right? The risk reward is just not there. So it's just way smarter for you to tackle questions that you can score very well in, maybe secure a baseline D grade, right? And then tackle the last 1 to 2 questions that could get you your A. So in terms of the mentality, it's also very important. And to put these 2 points together, you can also think about it this way. It's so important for you to get your time management skills right. You do not want to have so little time left at the end, or for you to rush through the front of the paper and to have too much time and you're just like, oh, what do I do? Then when you go back and you check, you realize, hey, wow, shit, step 1, right, I rushed through it and I got it wrong. So that's what Dion was saying, in terms of using your calculator, double checking your steps, making sure that you're doing it at an appropriate pace, not too fast, not too slow. That has to be the thing you need to remember going into your math paper.
Thanks, Dara, for that. Actually, I'm quite curious. Dion, you've been teaching and you've seen so many students, right? I'm sure you have had like cases where you saw kids in class as y'all were doing like your math together, and you're like, what kind of mistake is he making? It's so simple. But like, how did he make such a mistake? So, like, do you have any stories of students who do that, or like any common mistakes?
I think the most common mistakes would be copying the question wrongly. I think it is something that even I don't think is specific to A levels. I think even O levels and sometimes PSLE students they tend to make this mistake. I think it's very important to be extra careful when you are writing the question, because sometimes we tend to go with muscle memory, and we tend to just approach the question how we thought is going to be approached, based on how we have practiced it. Yeah, and sometimes it's very easy to copy wrong information or wrong numbers when it comes to doing the question in a time-based scenario or a stressful scenario. Yeah, I think that would be the most common mistake. Some of the more common costly mistakes would be not knowing that there's a page at the end of the paper, right? So please make sure when you flip your paper and when you check for each where each question is, please attempt every question and don't be like, oh, okay, I've reached the end of the paper already and let me go and check. But really check through to make sure that you have done every question number by number. Sometimes papers get stuck together and you forget, you don't even know that there's actually two more questions in the middle. Yeah, so I think these are the more costly ones. Other than that, the rest would be a bit more like topic specific. Yeah.
I see. And actually, for myself, I just wanted to add on while listening to Dion. What I learned to be really important in math is actually your presentation. Because if you write everything everywhere, right, and there's no steps, or you're just trying to shortcut it, and then plus, like you're not using your calculator, you're rushing, you're trying to mental sum things, your working is going to be everywhere. And if you want to check back, you don't even know where to start from because your numbers are just everywhere. So I think that goes into what Dion said also, as like, be really extra careful in not just reading the questions, identifying the correct numbers, but really your presentation needs to have clarity. It's really about helping you to keep it neat so that it's easier for you to do your exams. Anyway, we have reached the last question. Very, very important question. A lot of my JC friends back in the day also struggled with this because they were really like stuck and debating. Okay, so the question is, let's say it's prelim time, right? And I'm struggling already so badly with H2 math. I've got a U all the way, right? I can never ever pass. And I know that even if I practice as much as I can, I think I'm still gonna fail. Should I drop from a H2 math to a H1 math at this juncture?
Mm, I think the answer that I give most of the time would be no, because I think in the last month you never know how much you can actually improve, and I think is given that you have already pushed through for the last like 1.5 years, I think it will only do you justice if you really like continue to push through, and you never know what the last month can do for you lah. I don't think it should be is wise to just give up on both the subject and yourself at this juncture. But I think this advice will only be specific to the current J2 batch, because from the next batch onwards, actually you can not count your weakest H2 subject into your university score. So all the more I feel that if you're already at this juncture with 4H2, I think all the more you should just push for taking the 4H2 exams. I don't think it's worth it to drop to H1 at this point of time. Yeah. Daryl, what do you think?
You're talking last month, no. But if you are, say, still in J1 and you still have the option to drop, lah, meaning you're still taking 4H2 and math is really not your thing, before you make the decision, right, I highly recommend you look through based on your top 5 most likely university courses that you're aiming for
Yep.
and whether the H2 math is a prerequisite. If it's not, if it's not, it's still okay to drop. But if it is, I recommend pulling through with it because you will need it. It's not so much just for the grade to get into the course. When you go into the course, you don't want to die as well, right? So it really depends on what your personal goals are, and therefore for you to make a decision based on that. So a lot of times we need to understand in life, right? It's not so much like we are good at everything, right? Or we like everything, but there are certain aspects that comes along with it. So, and if math is one of the things that comes along with engineering, with com science, with whatever university course you're planning to go into, then all the more you should be investing time to get good at it. So a lot of times, mentality wise, is that, oh, it's so hard, I don't like it, I don't touch it, and therefore I suck at it. And because I suck at it, it reinforces the idea that, oh, it's so hard and I don't like it. So it's a very negative, perpetuating loop that never ends. So the only way to break that loop is actually to spend time and to get good at it. Once you get good at it, it's like, oh, I like it, I kind of understand, I like it more, and then it builds this positive cycle. So a lot of times, regardless of whether it's even for math, I'll say even for science, right? A lot of students come to me for chem and they go like, "Watcha, I don't like chem. Chem is so hard." But it's just a matter of spending time. Once you understand it, I like it. It's actually not that hard. And then that's when they start to do well. And it applies across all walks in life, regardless of what you do. So it depends. Are you running away from the fight, or are you running away from a fight that you do not need to pick? So if you do not need math at J1 and you drop it, move on with it, right? Life goes on. You don't need it much. But if you need it, then take on that battle. Don't be afraid to face it. If you're only 1 month away from A level, my point is you have really invested so much time to learn all of the H2 topics as well as to put in time. Now it's just that you're not good at it. So the only question is how can you get good at it much faster? Identifying the topics, the practices, and actually reviewing your corrections and working. It is possible to make a lot of improvement in a short time, provided you have the right focus and you're putting in the time and effort to do so. There's no miracle one. The thing when it comes to academics is that if you put in the work and you put in the time, hopefully with a good tutor or with a good teacher guiding you, you can see improvement. But you must understand that this doesn't come naturally. It's not like at O level, you don't study, you can still do well. I would say it's a very different ball game, especially in JC. So please put in the work if you want to do well, and you will see yourself improving over time.
I think just to add on from that, I think the main thing that Dara is trying to propose to you guys is this, right? If you're bad at your H2 math because it's a psychological issue, right? Since JC1 you didn't like it and you didn't work on it, then clearly you know it's a psychological issue. You don't want to face it. But if it's something that you really feel like, hey, I cannot do it, and if you're at a much earlier juncture, then Dara's saying like, okay, maybe you can try to figure out a way to drop it, especially for the JC ones. But if you're the JC2 and you're at this juncture, you've already studied, the real answer is how do I get better at this faster, right? And it's really about finding the appropriate guidance and appropriate help, because sometimes if you're already stuck in that cycle, you need somebody to break that cycle for you. So finding a good tutor, finding your teachers at school might be something helpful. Yeah. And with that, we hope that this really, really helps you guys. We've come to the end of the podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And we will see you again if you have more questions for us. Bye.